Hello and welcome to the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library Sight and Sound Video Archives. I'm Tom Walton. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today. Our guest is a man I've known for many years, and I'm guessing so have you. He is Carty Finkbeiner, known by all as simply Carty, and he is, of course, the former mayor of the City of Toledo. At times controversial, always interesting. Carty's career in public service make him one of the most fascinating elected leaders in the City of Toledo's history. And Carty, thank you so much for your time today. Glad to have you.
I'm delighted to be here, Tom.
You've been associated with Toledo all of your life. Let's begin by talking about your childhood. You grew up, I believe, in the Westmoreland neighborhood. Can you talk about that? How did that childhood experience in Westmoreland shape the youngster that became Carty?
Well, it was the beginning, without any question. Westmoreland, as you know, is a pretty nice old West End type neighborhood. However, as you approached Dorr Street, moving from Bancroft and Upton Avenue, let's say, to Dorr Street, with Nathan Hale right in the middle where I attended elementary school, the Dorr Street and beyond, over in Nebraska, where the Champion Spark Plug was located, was a very ethnic neighborhood, largely Polish American neighborhood, Tom. A little diversity in African American representation. As you and I know, at this time, it's probably significantly, largely African American. I had a paper route, though. It was just a Sunday route, but I delivered both in my Westmoreland neighborhood and also went over into the Dorr Street neighborhood. And it was there that I learned that no matter where you have grown up, and no matter who your friends in that immediate neighborhood have been, those youngsters over, let's just say, in the Dorr, Nebraska neighborhood, were very much like the kids where I grew up. We were always testing each other to see who was a little better at football, basketball, baseball, or whatever. But they had the same hopes, the same desires that I had. And at Nathan Hale, we all gathered, except for those that went to the Catholic school in the neighborhood. We all gathered there, and so it was a very good mix of people, and I am very, very grateful that I had that exposure to many families from different walks of life. My best friend growing up had a lot of Catholic youngsters around us, in that we were in the Jesu parish also. But my very best friend was a Jewish youngster by the name of Steve Bash. I learned a lot about the Jewish faith and community from Steve. I learned from those that were over in the Dorr Street quarter, largely Polish Americans. I learned of their Catholic Polish American tradition. I'm very, very grateful that Mom and Dad chose to settle where they did, because I had a
Talking about Mom and Dad, your father was also Carlton C. Finkbeiner.
Yes, he was.
And your mom, Dorothy Powell. I think she was born in Bowling Green.
She was. Church Street.
Talk about your parents. Your dad was a civil engineer?
He was a civil engineer, yes, Tom. He attended for 2 years. He lived in Perrysburg his entire life until he graduated from the University of Michigan's engineering school. Dad, Perrysburger, but did attend Scott High School. Perrysburg High School had not been built until he was a junior, and he spent his last 2 years at Perrysburg High School. Prior to that, at Scott High School. Now, his only brother was a well-known Toledo attorney, and perhaps the best-known lobbyist in the state of Ohio, Don Finkbeiner. Uncle Don graduated from Scott High School, where he was a City League football player, and went on to play at the University of Michigan. My affinity for the University of Michigan, both Dad and Uncle Don. Mom, Bowling Greenite, but however she came to work after she attended for 1 year only Ohio Wesleyan. She came to work at the old Lamson store and spent many years there, and she and Dad did not marry until Mom was approximately 36, 37 years of age. Dad was 3 or 4 years older. I was the firstborn in 1939, and I believe my mom was very, very close to 40 when I was born, and yet gave birth to 2 younger brothers, Chris and Dave. So they married late and stayed married until Dad died in 65 of cancer, and my mom survived him until 1989. We stayed in that West Toledo neighborhood, West Warland, right up until I was a senior in high school, and then they found a place out in Perrysburg that they both liked, and so my senior year we moved from a place I was very happy, and that is the DeVilbiss neighborhoods of West Toledo out to Perrysburg.
But your schooling was, at that point, you moved beyond Nathan Hale. You were at Maumee Valley Country Day School.
I was. Willis Stork was the
You were
principal.
recruited by him.
I was. Principal, headmaster. He was a real sports fan, and in the mid-50s, no, I take that back, early 50s. I started there in 53. I graduated from Nathan Hale in 53. Mr. Stork went on a recruiting binge. He was granted by the board 20 to 25 scholarships. And just before I was going to begin at DeVilbiss, no more than 4 weeks before I was to begin, it was early August of 53, Dad came home one night and announced to Mr. Stork, who he knew through Rotary, where you're involved, that Mr. Stork was going to come over to show slides, I think it was, of Maumee Valley Country Day School. Well, I didn't think at the time that anything would come of it. But the slides were impressive, and he was a very good salesman. He was a baseball player, Tom, incidentally. He loved baseball. I played golf the next morning in Ottawa Park, and I told my best friend, Rick Wall, who he and I together were going to go to DeVilbiss in a month, that this Mr. Stork had come over, and I said to him at the conclusion of our conversation, well, sounds good, but I'm scheduled to go to DeVilbiss with my best friend, Rick Wall, and we hadn't been playing golf for more than an hour and a half when Rick Wall's mom came driving around the golf course at Ottawa Park telling Rick that Mr. Stork from Maumee Valley was coming to his house, their house, that night, and go through the same pitch.
So it turned out to be a package deal, sort of like Koufax and Drysdale.
Well, we ended up going along with Anthony Platinsky from Scott High School, very good football player, Tony Platinsky was, Jude Hensler, who was a outstanding basketball player at Central Catholic. They recruited Jude. Jude ended up running for governor of Alaska a few years ago for the Green Party. 20 to 25 scholarships. And I'll close this by saying the most interesting thing was I played for Nathan Hale football, and that's what I was looking forward to playing at DeVilbiss, which was a really outstanding football machine in those days. But the best football player of that given time was a fellow named John Dresser, the son of Don Dresser, president of Toledo Trust. John was just big and strong, and he had already been at DeVilbiss for 1 year where he'd run roughshod over everybody in the City League as a freshman. Lo and behold, my first day at Maumee Valley, I look across the study hall table, and here one of those 20 to 25 recruits was none other than the fabled John Dresser, who Mr. Stork had also
At this point, you thought you'd made the right decision.
I did. Unfortunately, he only lasted one more day, and then the pressures of the DeVilbiss High School student body and head football coach Hilton Murphy took John back to DeVilbiss, where he made first-team high school All-American, a full ride to Ohio State.
But your affinity for leadership was already beginning to show itself at Maumee Valley. I think you were president of your freshman class, sophomore class, junior class, and senior class. Is that right?
I was. And that was wonderful, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. You do know, I know, our audience may not know that Maumee Valley, we had the largest class at that time in the history of Maumee Valley. I think it was something like 27 students. My friend Rick Wall, incidentally, was on student council all 3 years, and then he ended up being student council president his senior year. But it was a great experience, and here the sociological training, though, I was put in with a lot of kids whose families had built Toledo, the Stranahan family and the Secor family and the DeVilbiss family. A lot of their kids were out there, and initially you're somewhat in awe and intimidated because you knew the name DeVilbiss, you knew the name Stranahan. But here were my friends that had come from the Scotts and the Centrals and the Nathan Hales and the DeVoes and so forth, and we actually were being looked upon as kind of the new era and the savior of competitive high school sports, at least at Maumee Valley. And so the old line kids, the blue blood kids, they kind of were giving us a lot of love because we had accepted the opportunity to go there. And once again, I learned no matter where you come from and what your name is, we all basically have very similar securities and insecurities, wants and fears, and that was a great experience.
Your prowess as an athlete came to the fore during that time as well. You were the quarterback, were you not, of the high school football team?
And a great blessing there. We lost for 3 straight years, Tom, usually by scores of something like 49-7. If we got one score, it was usually pretty good. We played the Norwalk, St. Paul's, and we played the reserve teams of some of the city schools and so forth and so on. We would get badly beaten. But my senior year, they hired a gentleman by the name of Harry Larsch. Harry had been line coach for the University of Toledo, had a falling out with the fabled Frosty England, and quit. And Mummy Valley hired him. And in 1 year, my senior year, which taught me a lesson here, and that is don't give up, don't give in, no matter how gloomy and bad things look. And Mr. Larsch turned us totally around, and we won every game but one our senior year by scores similar to what we'd been losing, 49-7. We were beating everybody 49-7. He ended up going, after 1 year at Mummy Valley Country Day School, back to the University of Toledo as the head football coach the next year. I had an opportunity. He offered me this is a little known fact, which he offered me a full ride to go to the University of Toledo. I didn't seriously consider it because everybody at Mummy Valley Country Day School went away to school. In retrospect, it would have been interesting had I accepted it. I don't know how I would have done in the football program over there because that was a big step up for Mummy Valley. But 5 years later, I go back as a graduate assistant, eventually working my way up to full-time assistant for Frank Lauterbur at the University of Toledo.
That's right. But you did go away to college, did you? Trinity College in Connecticut. Why did you choose Trinity?
My dad was good friends, had gone to Michigan with the president, Dr. Al Jacobs. My cousin Don was a senior in college at Trinity when I was a senior at Mummy Valley Country Day School. That's Don Jr. And my headmaster was at Mummy Valley, the principal, was a graduate of Trinity College. So I had a little pressure. I had applied to Pennsylvania and applied to Denison University, but I chose to go to Trinity. Incidentally, Trinity in those days was a real powerhouse in small college football. Dan Jesse, it was a household word as Woody Hayes was in Big Sur. Dan was about in his 60s then, and he had been there for 35 years. Sent a few players to the National Football League, one of whom I played with when I was at Trinity.
In fact, you did play football at Trinity, and then you sustained a football injury, right? That cut your career short.
Yeah, my sophomore year, and here's the interesting thing. And you look at life, and you just look at life and the little ironic things that happen. One, having a chance to go to UT and turning that down, and then ending up back there for 4 years, which almost was like a second 4 years in college. I was so young. But when I was at Trinity my sophomore year, our very first game was at Denison. I had never visited Denison when I applied there as a senior in high school. And here's my first trip to Granville with the Trinity College football team. We flew into Columbus, spent the night there the night before, and I was pretty in awe of 3 things. The hills of Granville, it's pretty flat in Hartford, Connecticut too. The girls, the co-eds, we were all boys at Trinity College, and my family, everybody from around these parts came down to see the game at Granville, and that was kind of nice too. So when I got hurt about a month later with a concussion and head injury, and the doctors recommended that I not continue to play football, I dropped out of school in the middle of the semester, came home, and while I was home, I thought, okay, I'm not going to be able to play football again. What am I going to do? And I decided that was pretty nice down there in Granville, and I reapplied and
so you finished your undergraduate career
and finished my undergraduate career, correct.
You once pondered a career in the ministry. I think your family was Episcopalian. You were seriously considering that, and you did not. Why did you back away from that?
I made a lot of mistakes in life, as the Toledo Blade, your former employer, documented from time to time. But also on that some of the sort of the big waves of life, would really be extremely thoughtful, something I'm not known to be for the general public, as more of a shoot from the hip guy, but on the big decisions of life, I was pretty thoughtful. I remember going to school all those years. Mom and Dad had me in preschool, and then all the years at high school and college. I went into the chapel many times my senior year at Denison, Swayze Chapel. Prayed to God, what should I do? I didn't really have any desire to be a moneymaker. I knew that much about myself at that point in time, but I really didn't have a clue what I did want to do after all those years of education. Eventually, I decided, because it was offered to me, there was an opportunity to teach the 6th grade at Maumee Valley Country Day School and be assistant football coach. And I think probably the assistant football coach position lured me as much, if not more, than the 6th grade teaching job. But actually, I enjoyed both of them back at Maumee Valley. But into my blood, and this will answer the theological question, into my blood, first and foremost, at that time came college football coaching. So before I even thought seriously about the ministry, I had dismissed money making pretty much. Education was still a possibility, but then in education, I loved that coaching experience. And while I was at Maumee Valley, before I made the decision a few years later on theology, I thought I want to be a college head football coach.
And you did move on to the University of Toledo
Right.
as an assistant football coach. A lot of people may not remember that or realize that. That must have, at that time, seemed like the perfect job for you.
It did. And how perfect did it seem, Tom? I was accepted at the University of Michigan. Now, there was my ultimate dream. I also knew I wasn't big enough, strong enough, fast enough, or anything of that nature to play football for UM. But I did. Bump Elliott was the head coach at Michigan. I went up for an interview and was granted a scholarship at the University of Michigan to study for a master's degree. Actually received that before I got the opportunity at the University of Toledo. I also applied to Minnesota, was turned down. Murray Warmath was then the head coach at Minnesota. But here I have an opportunity under a guy that I love, Bump Elliott, and at UM. And out of the blue, I get a phone call from a man who just has been hired before spring practice is supposed to start at UT, Frank Lauterbur. And he asked if I would come over and visit with him. And he said, I can only afford to pay you, I think it was $1,500. But he said, and you'll have all your books and tuition, and you'll have a room in the dormitory. I've already done that for 5 years. Now I'm going to do it for 4 more. He says, I'll give you room, board, tuition, and books in essence, and $1,500 a year, which he bumped up to $2,000 after a year. And I'd like you to coach the quarterbacks, though, at the varsity level, where at Michigan, I would have only been working with the freshman team. And Bump Elliott himself said, I think if I were you, you'll be closer to what the real college football coaching experience is like if you're working at the varsity level. And he recommended that, what shocked my dad, and my dad was, I think, disappointed. But I went on and spent 4 marvelous learning years at the university under Frank Lauterbur, who I still consider a very good friend and see probably every other
And that rocket program really took off, didn't it, under Lauterbur?
I learned a ton from Frank Lauterbur, including, frankly, going from being a boy to a man.
Okay.
And Frank could do that very, very to the point. And it didn't always, there were a few times when there would become, after I'd been chewed out by Frank, tears were dribbling down my
He showed you how to man up, in other words.
He did, absolutely he did.
At some point during that process, Carty, you got the fire in the belly for politics. How did that happen? Was there one particular event in your history, some epiphany or whatever, that drew you to the notion of public service?
It may have been, though I don't know it for sure. That was really, it was a growing thing. There were 2 influences upon me. One was John Kennedy's. I remember sitting in my fraternity house at Denison in early 61, I believe that would have been, listening just before I graduated, not very long thereafter. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country? I do remember that, and of course he was young, he was handsome, he was articulate. I began to, and Mike DeSalle also, and I live on the same street in Toledo today that Mike DeSalle lived on when he was the mayor, Townley Road. But Mike DeSalle also was the governor. And I remember going with a political science class over to Columbus and visiting with Governor DeSalle, formerly the mayor of the city of Toledo. Sort of put those behind me, though, because football was there and the rush of all of that. But after the 4 years at the University of Toledo, Tom, and the only reason I left it, I loved it, and one of my best friend today is my quarterback student, Danny Simrel, and got that chance to coach Dan. I wasn't sure that 35 years later, just going over that off-tackle player, the play-action pass, or whatever it was, I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to be as excited 35 years from now. In retrospect, I might have been. But that's when I went through the wilderness a little bit. Worked for the anti-poverty program, where I learned a lot about diversity and African Americans. I tried for 6 months stock brokerage trading at Bell and Beckwith. I walked away with it after 3 months because I knew that wasn't it, and it wasn't very long thereafter that they had their problems there. And I thought about theology before I thought about politics, but something about the grassroots organizing that I learned in the anti-poverty program kept me doing that via committee assignments, good do-gooder projects in Toledo, Ohio, while I was doing other things, but I really enjoyed that. And finally I decided, after visiting the theological seminary in Alexandria, Virginia, something out of the prayerful process you go through, and I really write for the ministry, it didn't totally ring. Even the bishop, my Episcopal bishop, said to me, try anything that's the least bit of interest to you. He said, make sure that this is what you want to do. And therefore I never got there, and I think it was probably right for a simple reason. The way I confront things, which is pretty direct and sometimes less tactful than it should be, and as you said, controversial. People will use some more damning descriptions than that from time to time. I think that probably works better in the field of politics with Republicans and Democrats and the interplay between the two than it would have in a church-like setting, where if I'd been as blunt as I was in politics, I think that half the church would have probably wanted to get rid of me, and I don't think the church would want to every year go through, should we keep him or should we not keep him? So I think it was probably a wise decision, but I'm still a regular, I'm a believer, and I am there every Sunday morning, not because I need to be there, although I do, but because it very uplifts me and inspires me and keeps me in dialogue and conversation with a higher power. And I happen to believe that that's a very important part of life.
Well, you'd made that move toward politics, and I think in 1974 you made your first run for public office, and you aimed high, taking on longtime incumbent Congressman Lud Ashley. You ran very well, but you lost. Why was there a run for Congress? Why a run for Congress your first time out of the chute?
Boy, it probably is a little bit like the dream of playing football for the University of Michigan. I was, I think, probably analytically intelligent enough as a senior in high school to recognize that that wasn't where I was going to get a chance to be on the field regularly. However, when I thought about that race, and I thought about it in '73, I followed a few campaigns here, including initially, as you well know, I was a Republican. John Andrews was an influence. He was a very powerful Republican, local chairman, state chairman. I thought, however, that in the field of politics, that a young person, Kennedy was only 43 when he became president of the United States, a young person, I think I was then 34, 35, that it wasn't an overreach, as it would perhaps have been overreaching to try to play football for Michigan. It wasn't an overreach for someone to seek to upset someone who I felt was a little out of touch, didn't come back as often as he should have, and I was pretty idealistic. Lud turned out to be a very talented individual. It bothered me a little bit that he was on the House Banking Committee, and as a quote progressive Democrat kept doing all these favors for these very conservative pro-Republican bankers, and that really upset me. So I really had a mission, and I didn't feel like, since he'd been elected when he was about the same age that I was running, that it was really an overreach to try to knock.
Now, it was in that campaign that your reputation as a tireless campaigner really became evident. Did you always run as though you were behind?
Well, I love to interact with people, Tom. Not necessarily in a social setting where people are making idle talk, I will say, filling up the cocktail hour with conversation about things other people's going in one ear. Not that. What I love is to see people at their front doorstep, or in a
Street corner.
Yeah, street corner, or in a union hall, or an education forum where people are really upset about something within. That is, to me, is politics at its best. There's a lot of things about politics I learned not to like very much, but the conversations where you have with the average citizen who's pouring their guts out to you about what they're concerned about, I love that, and I found I could do that over and over again as a door-to-door campaigner and not get bored by it, which most politicians would get bored by that. I never did.
Even today, that's
Yeah,
part of who you are.
I love going to the stuff, the do-gooder projects I do now are church-related, and I'm helping a couple candidates on their campaigns, and I urge them to do the door-to-door. And guess what? I enjoy going with them, or to the football games before the game begins or something.
Carty, we have to mention the Outstanding Young Man thing of the
Sure
year
you
from the
do.
JCs.
Yes, sir.
When you were a young man, an award you ultimately had to return. And I want to give you a chance to address that, if you like, for history's sake. Ultimately, you returned it over alleged problems with the resume. Was that a regrettable indiscretion or simply a misunderstanding?
Well, Tom, it was, first of all, my responsibility entirely. It was 1970. There were two aspects of it. The second aspect of it, which was the public one that got bandied about a lot, was very, very legitimate, honorable mistake. But the big mistake was I was a JC. That was no problem for the JCs. I took, they said there's a lot of other JCs that are candidates for this thing too. I was working. Terry Gallagher was the chairman of the dinner, and I was helping him and get ready for the dinner and so forth and so on. If there was a real problem, it was the conflict between my candidacy for the Outstanding Young Man of the Year award and being involved in the actual planning of and promotion of the event. The thing that the public, I think, seized upon, and judges and so forth, I had said on a resume that I would begin working for the Ohio Department of Urban Affairs January, on or about January 1 of the very month, actually, the Outstanding Young Man event was taking place. I think it was the 20th of January, 1970. And I wasn't working at the Ohio Department of Urban Affairs. Now, the truth of the matter is, I was going to go to work for the Ohio Department of Urban Affairs. The bureaucracy in Columbus had just not gotten it done, and I wasn't there, and it was 3 weeks later, the event was beginning to take place and so forth. So as employment, my employment was not as the resume stated. And that was an honest mistake and a bureaucratic one. But I think the bigger issue that really behind the scenes among JCs and so forth was, should we have allowed Finkbeiner to be a candidate when he was involved in the planning and promotion event? And I think the honest answer to that one was no. Nobody who was involved in getting that event ready to take place should have probably been allowed to be a candidate for it.
Okay. Now, you talked a little bit ago about some of the party affiliations you've had. When it comes to political labels, you've worn a number of them. You were a Democrat.
I haven't been a Tea Party member.
No, not yet. But you were a Democrat who supported Richard Nixon. You later were a Republican who supported George McGovern. You've been an independent. Were those decisions political expediency or genuine changes in your personal beliefs?
One thing, I suppose in all of our lives there have been a moment or two where you do stuff for an expedient reason, but the bigger decisions in my life, I have always been honorable to I call it my gut, but that's the ones I pray a lot about, I think a lot about, I ask people's opinions a lot about. The Nixon thing, I just got asked to be actually involved at a very high level, the state level. Mike Searing and myself were a two-man office in Columbus under the Speaker of the House, Ted, and I can't remember Ted's last name now, and we did a lot of work, that you would expect. I remember making the phone call.
Kerfus, are you talking about?
Not Charlie Kerfus, no. Gentleman from Southern Ohio, and I just can't remember his name right now, but This
Fry?
would be before
Charles Fry?
Wasn't Fry.
I don't think he was a speaker.
I'm pretty
Anyway,
certain his name was Ted.
Okay.
But I remember making the call when I was down there to the owner of the Cleveland Browns, Mr. Steinbrenner, and got $500 from him. Which, boy, I was telling everybody about that for a long time. He probably could have given us $5,000 if I. That's what I was elated when he said, "I'll pledge $500." But
Where was the aiming high when you needed it?
Yeah. But at any rate, John Andrews, a good family friend, had arranged for me to get that experience. I was trying to get a little experience to get a feel for whether I was actually going to go into politics or not. But that was '68. 4 years later, we experienced Watergate and some other things, and I was a voter for George McGovern, which pretty much, even though I ran after that as a Republican, but I think the people that came in and supported me, Tom, sort of speak for where my philosophy was. Mark Catfield, who was a very progressive Republican out of Oregon, Bob Packwood, who later got into some difficulty, came out of Oregon to support me. Elliot Richardson, after he was fired as Attorney General, came into Toledo to support me. So I chose the only probably moderate that came in was the Speaker of the House in Washington, John Rhodes from Arizona, also came in. But people I were having coming in on my behalf were the progressive wing of the Republican Party, which pretty much by that time my philosophy had been, and I'm still there today and proud of it.
One of the features of your political career has been you never seemed motivated by money, and I think ultimately you ended up on Toledo City Council, where I think you were making $7,800 a year at one point, which probably for somebody who had been offered $1,500 to coach at UT must have seemed like a lot of money, but in the scheme of things really isn't. Is that what we mean when we talk about, is it what you mean when you talk about the sacrifice of public service? It wasn't about the money.
It's amongst them, but frankly, it's, and I'd love to talk on this one. We could do a whole program. The joy of life is doing what you wish to do. And if you're blessed to wish to help people, if you like people, particularly if you like, and I do very much, people that are struggling, people that I have a very good rapport to this day, Tom, with the African American community. I'm not sure, I say this probably with pride that the Bible would say you're never to have, but I'm not sure that there's a white politician in Toledo that has better rapport with African Americans than I do. I sense their the frustrations of the lives since slavery, and that their feelings that they're always looked at first by their color and not by how smart they are or how caring they are. Well, at any rate, if you're blessed to really, if you're blessed to care about people and seeing that the whole system is as fair as it can possibly be for everybody, that's a blessing. And if you are blessed like that, you don't have, now if you're a doctor and you still make a fair amount of money, but you're helping the less fortunate, and you're going to, maybe you're making money here and spending a month a year in a developing nation helping attack a disease over there that's spreading. I think that's a huge blessing. So I encourage young people, do what your heart leads you to, and you don't have to worry about ending up being respected. You'll be respected because you'll work your tail off because you love what you're doing.
Yeah. Now, finally, after several terms on City Council, Toledoans voted in the early 1990s to change their form of government, of course, from a city manager form that had endured for decades to a strong mayor or executive form of government. Was that the grand moment you were waiting for?
No, because I'd lost prior to that time. I had lost in '81. I mean, I lost 4 major races, 2 for Congress and 2 for mayor. Yeah. Only one of those was lopsided. The second race, actually the other 3 were pretty close races, but I lost them. And so I tried in '81 and '87. I'd always bounce back then and become a councilman 2 years later. I just began to be, I think, a pretty thorough student of cities that were being successful. While we had wealth, I'm not certain that we were getting as much done as we could get done. And finally, in that year that the thing I will say, I believe, led to us getting it passed, I sort of took charge of that and took several businessmen and educators and labor leaders and newspaper people to 4 cities, each of which had a strong mayor. We were judging the strong mayor system by Coleman Young's last few years in Detroit, it seemed to me. So we ended up going to Louisville, where Jerry Abramson was very effective as a strong mayor, and Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Cleveland, Ohio, where Mike Young, succeeded George Voinovich. I can't think of Mike's last name at the moment, but they were all doing very well. And I thought it was important to get our business and labor and legal community to see how the strong mayors really could work with the private sector to keep their city's momentum moving forward. And I'd already lost twice, but when it passed, I jumped at the opportunity to run for mayor. And that one might come under the role of the term of expedient. I might accept the term expedient
1993.
on that one. 93, yes, sir.
You ran and defeated Mike Ferner.
By a skinch of an inch.
Very slim margin. You came back 4 years later and won a second term against a relatively obscure businessman.
By a little bit more, inch, but not much more.
But were you surprised by the closeness of the margins in those 2 races? You were well known across the city. Nick Wachowski was not.
No, obviously, but this time, you as well as anybody in Toledo look at 30 years or something like that in government, first elected in '79, but run a couple times before, and you clearly see somebody that, in the easiest way that we've heard, you either love him or you hate him. Well, we know nobody really does love me except hopefully my wife and my grandchildren, and nobody really hates me either. But there is this thing about Finkbeiner that you either are for him or you're against him, and there's probably an equal number of people that enjoy saying I'm against him, and there's probably a few others that feel somewhat like the ladies that spoke to the President of the United States about 2 weeks ago when she confessed that she'd voted for him. and she indicated what she said, she was still going to vote for him, but that she was very fatigued for having to admit that she voted for him. And I very much empathize with the President on that one, because I'm sure a lot of my supporters have felt fatigued. But I pour my heart and soul into issues, as you well know.
Well, there's no question.
People get turned on and turned off by that.
But your passion was never questioned. Even your political enemies always said his heart's in the right place. He just goes about it in the wrong way sometimes.
Yes.
Does that help explain that conundrum? I mean, nobody doubted your love of the city of Toledo, yet so many people voted against you.
You're back where you should have been, because you asked me the question, I didn't answer it. It certainly didn't surprise me, the closeness of the race with Mike Ferner, because Donna Owens and Doug DeGood had beaten me, I think, each by roughly 1,000 votes in very close races. And I spent a long time debating whether I should get into the race for the strong mayor. A friend of yours in Bowling Green, Ohio, made the final decision for me, actually, Ed Ryder. I'd asked several people whose opinions I respected, and Ed said, you know, you love it, and if you don't give it one more shot, 25 years from now, you'll be beating yourself up. So with that, I moved forward, knowing that if I lost 3 times, I would be the all-time loser of mayoral contests in Toledo. And I was behind by 17 points to Mike with about 10 days to go, according to a Gallup poll. And I'm not sure that poll was right, because once again, even that far back, I think a lot of people that actually pull the lever for me don't admit that they're going to vote for me ahead of time.
That's a factor, isn't it? Yeah.
But I did win, and I wasn't surprised that it was that close. Now, 4 years later, Tom, we had just secured a commitment from Bob Eaton that Chrysler was going to build a new plant in Toledo, and the Blade had said on January 1, 1997, Finkbeiner, you better damn well get that new Jeep plant for
Year
Toledo.
of the Jeep. I think we call it Year of the Jeep.
Year of the Jeep. And 6 months later, we had it. So we also had, Owens Corning was building a new world headquarters. The Docks restaurants had been built in in East Toledo. We were on a roll. Dane had built their commercial credit out on Richards Road. I mean, we had a terrific gain in investment in Toledo, and so I was a little surprised that that was a close election in 1997. Yes,
And
I was.
Of course, after you served your 8 years and your 2 terms, you were term limited out of office as part of that change to a strong mayor form of government. You took 4 years off and came back to win another 4-year term then in 2000. That began in 2006.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you feel reborn to get back to the job you loved?
That was a tough one because I had a heart surgery in 2004, quadruple bypass surgery, and my family did not in any way, shape, or form want me getting back into that job. It seemed that a good man and a good friend, who I really do feel very, very warmly toward, couldn't get traction as the mayor, and that's the way I'd put it. He's a talented, gifted individual, Jack Ford, and a wonderful wife, Cynthia Ford, but it seemed like he was having a hard time getting traction in behalf of the good things for Toledo. And so, you know, there were a lot of people that were urging me to go in that race, and I took a lot of time. I finally did say to my family, we all got together, and one part of the family, my daughter Jenny and her husband live in Colorado, but Katie and Tim here in Perrysburg, Jenny and Matt, her husband, and Amy and I got together, and the bottom line is, I said, I know you're wise. I'm going to try to do this with a lot less personal passion, I guess, and I'm only going to do it for 4 years. But I think I need to do it. And
that was not generally known, was it? That you told your
time.
family just one more 4-year term?
No, not at that
because there was
time,
still
it
speculation at the end of that time you might go
Yes,
again.
there was.
But
Tom.
you knew you wouldn't do it.
Yeah, and that probably, Tom, that probably hurt. It probably hurt me. It probably hurt the city because I still was pretty passionate, and I will tell you quite honestly, I think I did as good a job, which a lot of people don't agree with, in my 3rd term as I did in my first 2. Interesting enough, we actually ended up with more investment in Toledo in any single term. That last year we had the most investment. We were helped by the General Motors $1 billion investment out at their Chevy plant. But you really, as you well know, you interviewed me many times, you really have to live and die to be a great mayor, or a great governor probably, but a mayor who's right close to all the problems has really got to live or die. I probably still had as much passion as many do, but I wasn't living and dying it because I was thinking about my ticker, and I was thinking I'm going to be out of this job eventually, and that also led me to being less political and even more blunt than I normally am with regard to city finances. That was, I felt like, yes, we could cut back in some areas, Tom, but my homework and research was telling me that we had fewer city employees than any other municipality in the state of Ohio. We vied with it with a very thorough mayor and a good friend of mine, Don Plasqualik, Bowling Green State University graduate in Akron, the dean of all Ohio mayors. Donnie runs a very, very tight ship down there, and for a long time we were dead even in fewest number of policemen, firemen, and inspectors, but we bypassed Akron even in the last 4 years I was in, so I knew we were down to the bare bones of our, and my employees at the top were working with a 10% pay cut. My last year in office, and nobody knows this time, of $137,000 salary, I gave back $52,000 or $3,000 of it, paid bills or returned to the general fund about $52,000, $53,000, probably half of what I actually would have ended up after taxation taking home. I gave back. We worked on Saturday mornings cutting the parks in the city and so forth. I think we did the right things to try to balance the budget, but I felt like the city had 2 or 3 areas where we could cut costs and improve productivity. The one-man garbage crews was one. We have now gone to them, and I think it was the right thing to do, the automated garbage pickup. I thought citizens living outside, living in Toledo, but paying most of their tax out where their job was not fair to Toledo. And I still feel that that's not fair to Toledo, and people in Bowling Green live by the standard that I thought we ought to have in place. I felt pretty strongly about that. And I said, ultimately, if we don't make some of these adjustments and changes, we're going to have to do what Columbus has done and what Findlay seeks to do, and that is to raise the payroll tax. We can't keep crime down in a beautiful city unless we have the money to do it. And ultimately, a lot of people, councilman included, got very, very upset with me for taking that position, but I believe I was right then, and I think it's only a matter of time. What Mike has done, and forgive me, this will be in the future, so I got to talk, Mayor Bell has done, I didn't want to do, Tom. A lot of councilmen did. The easy way out is to take money from your infrastructure budget called capital improvement. That's your streets, your roadways, your parks, and things like that, where you've got to put cement buildings in place or improve the concrete pavement of the street. They wanted to take that money and put it to pay policemen and firemen salaries. I fought them on that. They actually put it on the ballot. We beat them on it in 2009, but it passed by a slight margin in favor of it this last time. So the only thing they're doing differently now really is taking about $12 million that would be going to do the streets and the parks and things like that, and then they're paying salaries. But that's going to catch up in a year or two, and meanwhile the streets and the parks aren't going to look like
Well, let me
they
ask
should.
you, 12 years you served as strong mayor of Toledo, 8, then 4 away, then 4 back again. What do you consider your 2, 3, or 4 perhaps greatest accomplishments?
That's not complicated. I think being a mayor really is as simple as this. Citizens want a safe city. Citizens want a clean city. If you can add beautiful to that, they love it. And they want good schools. Schools, the mayor of Toledo doesn't have a lot of play in that one. So you're left with really safety, public safety, and a clean city. We, as you well know, took a lot of pride, take the cleanliness thing, and flowers, spent a modest about $20,000 of public money my last year and got $20,000 from the private sector, a total of $40,000, but had flowers on the Anthony Wayne Trail at entry points to the city. And I can't tell you how important I think it is for green spaces and colorful flowers and things of that nature, where there's a lot of cement and concrete ribbons cutting across cities these days with the interstate highway system. The more you can have green space and flowers. We did an excellent job of that, and we got some awards for doing that, national awards. Secondly, we did a heck of a job with public safety too. 2007, 13 people were killed in the city of Toledo. That was the fewest number of murders in the city of Toledo since, I think, is when I was coaching and teaching at the University of Toledo, somewhere in the 1960s. It did come up, probably doubled that to about 26, I think, the following year. It might even hit 30 or 31 the year after that. But for most cities of 300,000, my fellow mayors are astounded at how safe Toledo is. So I think, and I'll give the cops credit for that, I'll give Chief Navarre credit for that, and we won a national award 2 years ago or 3 years ago for the #1 block watch program in the United States of America, and I'll give the citizens their dues on that too. Now, what I really was, though, was a builder. I wanted to build as much new stuff and refurbish as much as we could. It was easy the first 8 years, where we built a new Jeep plant, the Owens Corning World Headquarters building, Dana Commercial Credit. We put the docks in play over there. Got about 4 times more capital improvements money out of Columbus after I had a big battle with Governor Voinovich and Paul Mifsud. Yeah, huge battle down there once early in my first year of the 8 years I'm down there, and told them how little we were getting, but they ended up funding the Buckeye Basin Greenbelt Parkway the following year and widening and improving I-75 from the Michigan line to downtown Toledo. So they really ended up coming through for us in great style. In total, Tom, even though it was not as noted the last 4 years, General Motors put $1 billion in. HCR Manor Care made a real effort to get my attention because they had offers from Tennessee and Indiana to put their world headquarters there. And we fought that off, and with the help of the governor, HCR Manor Care stayed. A lot of people wanted to fold the tent on COSI. And I and Jim Huffman of Skybank, I want to say KeyBank, yes, and a couple of others, we had to go before about 30 of our top businessmen and bankers and say, hey, we worked too hard to get this. We need to put it on the ballot one more time, which was the third time. We fought vigorously. I went door to door for that, and it passed. We kept that. In total, over the 4, you asked me, Tom, and so it was clean city and a more beautiful city, a safe city. There were $4 billion invested in Toledo during the time that I was mayor, including 22,000 new jobs and 27,000 jobs retained. And we worked for an awful lot of jobs that had nothing to do with a big name like Jeep or Owens Corning or HCR Manor Care, but more to do with a little entrepreneur who had an idea for a beauty shop or even a saloon or a restaurant. And then in the last 4 years, the solar energy thing I really bought into, and along with Dr. Jacobs, pushed a lot of solar energy startups.
Well, the days of a new manufacturing plant bringing in 4,000 to 5,000 new jobs probably were over at that point.
That is correct.
Set your sights a little more modestly, I guess.
We built an industrial park called North Cross Industrial Park that created 550 jobs out there. But we've been through over and over again. We can validate, document. Now, there's a couple things you and I worked on, and I'm proud of that. Fifth Third Field. A lot of people were very satisfied with the Mud Hens playing out at the old, venerable, but outdated Skeldon Field at the old racetrack out there on Conant Street in Maumee. And we put that before the voters, and you were a co-partner along with Mr. Deveneaux and Gene Cook was very much supported. I never was convinced that, frankly, that Ed Bergsmark, I think he kind of liked having his own parking space, his own niche, and that little thing. I never was convinced Ed was 100% for it, but it went down to defeat. But almost immediately thereafter, I've never seen something turn around. The letters, the editors started flowing in. Did we do the wrong thing? And by gosh, we eventually got Fifth Third Field downtown, and Blade was a little less involved, and I was a little less involved, but I supported Pete Gherkin's initiative to put a new sports arena in downtown Toledo, and that was the right thing, and Fifth Third Field was the right thing, and now we've got the convention center, Fifth Third Field, and that beautiful new sports arena.
Totally reborn downtown.
We do.
It's exciting.
Yeah, we do, Tom.
Obviously, Carty, no leader achieves everything on his wish list. What nags at you to this day, perhaps, as your most profound disappointment?
Probably three things, one of which, all three of which are going to happen. And I'm not saying that just to be politically correct or anything, but they will happen. It's just a question of time. I was very confident there was going to be an announcement about a new line at Jeep in late November or early December of my last 45 days on the job. Bruce Baumhauer, forgive me. Bruce Baumhauer, president of Local 12, UAW, venerable, longtime chairman. He was certain it was going to happen. I went the day after Election Day. I was not on the ballot. Mike Bell was running against Keith Wilkowski, but the election was on November 4 or 5. The very next day, I was in Auburn Hills, Michigan, with Sergio Marchioni, the CEO of the new Chrysler, if you will, and was trying to get from him a commitment to that. He wouldn't do that. He did tell me that one-on-one that he considered the Jeep to be the most dynamic car in the world. I felt pretty good that he was not going to in any way, shape, or form take work away from us, but I really thought we were going to get an announcement that would lead to maybe 1,000 new, and I think that eventually is going to happen. I believe there will be workers called back. I've talked to Bruce within the last month.
Do you put the Marina District on that list as well?
Yes, Marina District. That's a great disappointment that the funding We were so close on that. A local bank that is headquartered in Cincinnati, Fifth Third, and Larry Dillon had done a lot of work together. And Larry was pretty confident that they were going to provide him with the initial funding to make the Marina District. The governor came through in spades for us. We have a roadway built in there. We have money set aside for riprap on the waterfront. And we have money for a outdoor amphitheater over there. All of that money was set aside for it, but they reached a point where they said we've got to have the private sector, and Larry couldn't step up with it. Larry, speaking of Larry Dillon, the Levis Commons developer, that was a disappointment, but it will happen. Who would have thought that the land where we had it ready for a developer would end up with a casino on it? The land that Pilkington, adjacent to Pilkington on Front Street in East Toledo. But at any rate, that was a disappointment right there. The Marina District was huge. And lastly is Southwick. Worked every Friday morning, was set aside for discussions of how do we get things happening both at Marina District and Southwick for 4 years. Many discussions with Bill Dillard, the owner of Dillard's department store. We made progress on both of them. People would like me to have left office and felt that defeated or whatever. Well, history's going to record that with the modest of money available to us, we stretched things about as far as we could stretch it. And Bill Dillard and company, I eventually got to agree. See, they were still getting money for even keeping that largely vacant mall open. They were getting some money for doing that. Entered some agreement with a couple of other entrepreneurs, and finally we got them to agree. It took a little finding of asbestos out there in the hallways and so forth. So that was going to cost them a little more money than they were willing to put into the building to persuade them it was in their best interest to get it torn down. The state loaned us some money, which they agreed to pay back to tear it down. That land is going to be valuable out there, but that not happening, Southwick not happening, Marina District getting all the infrastructure in place, but no.
What about the old fiberglass tower? Sorry that didn't come along.
No, I'm happy about that, Tom, because we did everything that we could to get that in a very tough last 2 years. Took Lee Fisher over there, reminded him when he actually ran for governor a few years before that he'd made some commitments. Now we're talking in the early 90s. Lee had a bid for governor there that fell short. Bob Taft beat him. Both he and Taft made a tour with me at that time, my second term as mayor, of the Owens Corning Tower, and both of them thought it was a wonderful building. But Lee, I think in a desire to see that the Toledo Blade gave a recommended check mark to him, he came down in favor of doing what was necessary to clean that building up later as the lieutenant governor, and he came through with his promise. Now the Ides, they're people that I lured to Toledo to do the old Lamson's building. We now call it One Lake Erie Plaza. They actually own that yet, and Fiberglass Tower they own. I think that will eventually get developed. Okay. I hope that it will.
Carty, I would like to talk in some of the time we've got left about your wife Amy. You told a Blade reporter in 1985, sometime after your divorce from your first wife Valerie, that you doubted you would ever remarry. And you said, and I'm going to quote, "If you're interested in public service, you've got to have a really committed spouse or you're going to have a less than healthy relationship," end of quote. Obviously, and you married Amy in 1990. You, in your 20th year of marriage to Amy, something changed your mind.
You know, I'm a great fan of The West Wing, and The West Wing, as you well know, is probably as well written a TV series. Jamie Farr would argue with both say that MASH was number one. I'll say MASH and The West Wing tied, but there's that sequence in The West Wing where the president's chief of staff, his wife, says you have to choose me or you have to choose being chief of staff, and he says, for this time in my life, I'm going to choose to be the best chief of staff I possibly could be, but it's only got 4 more years or something like that left in it. I suppose hard for people to understand that. But if you're really committed to anything that you do, there's so many hurdles you've got to climb because there's so many other people that want to do the same thing. And or if you're successful of climbing those hurdles and getting there, there's a few people out there that are then going to make you the target of their barbs and so forth. That takes a partner, I think. You can smile during the day and put your best foot forward and be buoyant and optimistic and hopeful and all those things. But at the end of the day, there needs to be a person at home that you can unwind, and sometimes it is unload, unfortunately, where you say, damn it, can't people see this? Or why is that council going in that direction? Or in your case, respectfully, the publisher seems to be very exercised about this.
What's wrong with the newspaper anyway?
Exactly. And it certainly helps. And you know, because you've got a wonderful wife and a great relationship with her, it helps to have that kind of a colleague who knows this is not my night. This is not my time to talk about all my problems during the day. I better listen tonight. And there are times when my good wife, and I'm sure your good wife, will say, stop feeling sorry for yourself. You love what you're doing. You wouldn't be doing it. And if you don't like it, get the heck out.
That sounds awfully familiar.
and Amy is very, very good at knowing which role she's got to play at a given
I know one
night.
of the things that Amy was concerned about, and you've addressed it already, and that was your health.
Yes.
Particularly during the time when you were not in office, you were heavy, you were overweight,
Right.
by your own admission. The stress seemed like a daily part of your life. And a lot of folks, not just Amy, but a lot of folks were very worried about you. Did you realize what was happening to you at that time?
I did, because my friend and a gentleman well known to Toledoans, Andy Douglas, was considering investing in one of those new scanning devices where the heart could be scanned in a matter of a minute. He had me come down to Columbus to be a guinea pig. I've since learned that
60 seconds later, you knew you had a problem.
I did. They told me that I had more calcium leading into my heart than 2/3 of the men my age. They said, go back and get a stress test. That was in the year 2000. I passed a couple stress tests over the next couple years, but 2004 I didn't
Well,
pass
today
the
we sit
stress
here in
test.
2010, and you are 71 years old.
I'm 71.
As fit as I've ever known you. Fitness has really become a mantra for you, hasn't it?
It is, Tom, but I also know, and I only say this because you and you're the younger, but I have a flawed heart. I know that. And so there are things that I would love to do today, still pay pass and tap with my grandson and running. I love to run. But there's things today that I have learned that if I wish to live longer rather than shorter, I have to be more temperate in the exercise pattern. I certainly have to watch what I eat. I need to get more sleep, and I'm doing all of those things. And guess what? Even with all those, and I'm just saying this because we all have our things we have to live with. Yeah. I know I have a flawed heart, and I have to be careful, and I have to take certain pill every day to make sure that I don't put any extra emotional tension on that
Well,
heart.
I know the political bug never leaves. Will we ever see Carty Finkbeiner's name on a ballot again?
It's probably not likely, but you never say never. I am trying to help our governor, Ted Strickland, be reelected. Now, I didn't think I was, but then when I saw polls 2 weeks ago where he was down by 10 or 11 or 12 points, I got on the phone to John Hazley to talk with John about what they're doing, and I'm concerned about my friend, the Lieutenant Governor, Lee Fisher, and I'm working for State Senator Edna Brown, and a friend of mine, the mayor of Lansing, Michigan, is running to be the governor of the state of Michigan. And
Sounds like you got a full plate
Verge
politically.
Bonero, I'll be at a fundraiser for him in a couple of days up in Ann Arbor. So
Let me ask you.
I still enjoy it very, very much.
Okay. Sort of a question here. You talked briefly about, you mentioned the publisher, you mentioned the Blade. I wonder if you would talk with me for a moment about your relationship with the news media over the years? I know there were times you were angry with the Blade, angry with me, and with the radio and TV folks as well. How would you characterize that relationship?
Today?
Then?
Well, first of all, there's a difference between getting angry on a given day and not respecting and liking people that are in a business whose job it is to jab you from time to time. They call it telling the truth. We call it jabbing. Now, the newspaper, it's an outstanding newspaper for a community of 300, well, we're bigger than that, aren't we? Your region's bigger than that, say 500,000. It's an outstanding newspaper. And it's tough to be in the newspaper business as an independent today. So anybody who doesn't recognize the commitment and the contribution of the Block family to Toledo, Ohio, through not only the newspaper but by the cable system, is just putting their head in the sand and letting their emotions or their anger for a given day cloud over. I went to something late in my second term where I think it was a celebration of a birthday of the Blade. Now, when would that have been, roughly in 2000 or 2001 time? What anniversary?
175?
It's now at the Toledo Club. I remember that. But I said something like, I'm not sure the Blade would still be around today if they didn't have Finkbeiner to tell the truth about on some days and not tell the truth about on other days. And the Block family broke out in laughter, and most of the folks there, yourself included, did too. Mm-hmm. Newspaper, I think, for Toledo does an outstanding job, and John Block, who we both know extremely well. I didn't know Paul Block probably as well as you did, nowhere near as well as you did, but I know John cares about Toledo, and I know he gives a lot of thought to things like preserving old buildings, clean up the water of the Great Lakes states and so forth. And I just respect him incredibly for his passion about the things that he gets involved in. Now, the electronic media, I think they are one of the problems, to be very candid, in America for two reasons. One is now there's a gotcha mentality. It basically comes out of the cable shows, but there's a gotcha mentality. And a lot of the gotchas, nobody's done their homework to know whether it's validity or truthfulness to it. And it can be the black pastor now in Atlanta, Georgia, that they're talking about. He's not talking, but four young men are talking. I think there's a belief on some of our parts that they're telling the truth, but my God, the guy's going to be crucified before, even if he's found innocent, he's still going to blemish. There's going to be a huge blemish on his career. The gotcha mentality.
You had your run-ins with local radio too.
Yes,
Talk
I did.
radio.
Yes, I did, and I despise that radio station to this moment. The gotcha mentality is just, I don't like it. The other part of it, though, is there's this belief that Americans can't get high on good news, on the positive stories about your community, the quality of life here, there. I think our school system in northwestern Ohio, systems plural, Washington local, Toledo, the Catholic school system, the charter school system, plus you had the Owens Community Colleges, the two-year schools, and our University of Toledo. I think we've got fantastic educational opportunity here. It's much better than the general public. But we got on a thing a few years ago of running down Toledo public schools. It begins with as if they're the devil. And I feel badly for those teachers and that superintendents, because they're better. They're doing a better job than they get credit for. I just wish there'd be more depth of investigation on the electronic news media, but I never can criticize the Blade or the print media, daily print media. They do their homework, and whatever the conclusion they reach, we may not always agree with, but if I get angry, it should only be for a day or a week and not any longer than that.
Well, I like to think it passed very quickly. we always got along
with
very
you,
well.
It was never very long.
You've always been a guy who wears his emotions on his sleeve, Carty. You even cried in your office.
I did.
I know that might have bothered some, but I think it endeared you to a lot of others. I assume now that you're out of office, looking back, there's no apology for that passion.
Tom, I might stand there near the top of the class in admitting to being imperfect, because Lord knows, He knows how imperfect I am, better than anybody else knows I'm imperfect. But He knows, and others know, that I served without concern for income. I'd work for zero. And I guess I do have a admitted weakness. I don't suffer fools gladly or happily. And I don't mean to sound like I think I'm better than they, but when you do your homework, I hate to be challenged or sometimes defeated by people that I think are only taking the easy road out. I hate to say this, but those who would say that the general public would love to have every one of their elected officials be as forthright and straightforward and to the point and the truth, because the truth of the matter is there's an awful lot of guys that probably aren't worth much that retained their jobs in Congress for 40 or 50 years by doing nothing more than dance in the middle and never committing themselves. And there's a lot of guys that have been ousted after, and right now in 2010, we look at the first African American president, and I am amazed at the courage he has shown on issues that have been danced around in Washington for years, and he has looked his opponents in the eye and said, we're going to fight for every last vote, and if you vote me down, you vote me down, but I'm going to fight to have this thing passed. And of course, he's not very popular at the moment. So I've learned that the public doesn't always mean it when they say, just give me an honest, straight shooting guy who's doing what he thinks because he believes in his heart it's the right thing to do. They sometimes would rather have you put that aside and basically tell them what they want to hear. Yeah. I'm hoping that Obama 2 years from now can show us that a guy with a lot of courage and a lot of guts can be reelected.
Carty, it's no secret that your temper was occasionally on display. Were there times you regretted it?
I'm sure there probably was a time or two, but if you think you can run a big company or a big city or a big corporation and want it to be the best it's capable of being and be cool, calm, and collected and not have that be taken advantage of by your fellow employees and fellow citizens, I'm sorry. I think that's kind of naive. I think you've got to have somebody challenging a teacher who doesn't challenge her students or his students every day will someday say, I wish I'd had that day back again because that young man had the potential to be great. Well, I had 3,000 employees that I think had the potential to be great, and a city of 300,000 people. Incidentally, the federal government kept telling us it was 285 or 290, and we fought them, and we fought them, and we eventually found an extra 23,000 people that we...
want to keep that 3 as a first number
You
there.
betcha we do. But you've got to fight. You've got to fight daily, and that's why if you have a tendency to have a flawed heart, there's clearly going to be a little more pressure on that heart as a result of the passion to have those 3,000 employees and 325,000 citizens like the city well enough to be doing extra things like planting flowers in their front yard or painting their house or something like that. So I can't possibly begin to, I apologize for a lot of things, but it ain't ever going to be for having a little temper, because a little temper is necessary at times in life.
I'm going to pose a what if to you, Carty, as we wind down here. If you had not pursued a career in public service, what would have been your ideal job?
Well, one that I did, Tom, there's only two things, because I think that the decision with regard to the church, though I would have loved to have, I would love to have the opportunity. I love to try to motivate people, inspire people, get them involved. I think I made the wise decision on that, though, as in the right place for me to be in that church. I think it was football coaching, which in retrospect I think would have come as close. Young people I love. I'm not the most patient person in the world with adults, as you well know. Young people I am extremely patient with because I think most of them are pretty idealistic. Most of them probably want to do the right thing. Most of them aren't corrupt yet, bought off by money or bought off by titles. I love young people, and I think I would have probably had as much a ball like Joe Pye as had, and incidentally, Joe Paterno we're referring to when I was at the University of Toledo. Frank Lauterbur, when I said to him one time after the first year, I said, Coach, I know I need to learn a lot more. I know I need to be a better coach, so forth and so on. I said, is there anyone in particular you think would be a good mentor? And guess Frank who told me? He says there's a young coach at Penn State by the name of Joe Paterno. Nobody called him Joe Pa. And those Joe Paterno, he says he just wrote an article, and he pulled an article out that he had on a rollout play. He says, give him a call and tell him that Frank Lauterbur would appreciate it if he could give you some advice and counsel. So why does he keep doing that? Because he loves being with young people. They've kept him young. Mm-hmm. Woody Hayes the same way. Bo, if he hadn't had 4 heart attacks, Bo would still be coaching today too. So coaching, I explored, and I think I could have been very, very happy doing that. And Tom, the other thing I wish I won't say I wish, but I still look for, did when I was off for 4 years. I don't know if with the time I have left in life, I don't know if I'll be able to do it, but when I see institutions trying to make a difference where there's extreme poverty, extreme poor health, you just see little children and their parents that are just not being given anything close to a fair opportunity in life. I tried to find that when I was off for those 4 years, got very close to an organization in Washington, D.C. The leader was a Pakistani gentleman. It never worked out. I was trying to get it so I could do it, a couple days a week, 3 days a week, go to Washington, D.C. I was doing the television program for the TV station still, and I didn't want to give that up. But now if I'm going to be on I'll close this because I'm going to be on a long-distance call with the president of CARE, who does a great job with hungry people in those type of nations it's a conference call, a week from this Friday, I believe it is, because I'm still of the mind that we have been extremely blessed. One, grew up in this country, one, to have the opportunities and you and I have had, and that I'm asking the Lord to take care of me daily and I am. He's saying, okay, partner, if I'm doing that as my part of the bargain, what are you doing for your part of the bargain? Mm-hmm. And so I think there's maybe a place to try to be helpful in that respect, and I'm still looking for that place.
You may have answered my last question, and that is simply, what do you hope history says about Carlton S. Finkbeiner? What do you hope Carty's legacy will be?
Well, they're very simple, and I don't think on this one too many people argue. One, I was a pretty honest, straightforward, didn't ever take any money beneath the table. I didn't want to do anything but see Toledo, Ohio be what we became in 1998 officially, and the pin I deliberately chose to wear today, our All-America City pin. An All-America City, and that he lived and loved being the mayor of Toledo, and there wasn't any aspect of the city, one neighborhood wasn't more important than another neighborhood. They were all important. We drive them weekly and look at the alleys and things of that nature, and he'd get his hands dirty out there with anybody else. So the man for 12 years and 10 years before that, 22 years in total, loved Toledo, and felt blessed that I was given the opportunity to both be a councilman and a mayor of this city. I believe people, if you pray a lot and you work hard, ultimately your a path begins to evolve, and my path evolved was to be first a councilman and then a mayor. After two defeats by a skinch of an inch, I became a mayor for 12 years. I just feel very, very blessed, and therefore it wasn't work at all. It was really a joy to be able to do it.
Carty, thank you for the gift of your time today, and continued good health to you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much, and to you as well.
Thank you.